Arthropods. Arthropods have a variety of characteristics. We're going to talk about them as we go through. One of the key things I want to point out is that they are ecdysozoans, which means they have a cuticle that is shed through ecdysis. And in that process, there's loss of epidermal cilia as well. This group is monophyletic, so there's one phylum with 5 subphyla. So those subphyla are the chelicerates, which are the horseshoe crabs and arachnids, the crustaceans, which are things like crabs, lobsters, things like that, the hexapods, which are the insects, the myriapods, which are centipedes and millipedes, the trilobites, which are things that are commonly found as fossils, but they are entirely extinct. These are the trilobites. That's actually an extended trilobite. When they find them as fossils, they're usually curled up. I know you can't see this really well here, but you'll be able, if you extend the screen, which if I do it, you're not going to be able to see anything. You'll be able to see all the subphyla and then classes within them. Metamerism and tagmatization. This has to do with segmentation within the body as well as areas of specialization for feeding, locomotion, those kinds of things. What these two specializations or body specializations did was allowed for a lot more diversification of the organism. It meant that organisms became a lot more specialized in their niche and were able to diversify significantly more. The exoskeleton of these groups is present. There's no cuticle. That means it's not quite as rigid, and that in order for them to move, they have to be jointed in order to allow for locomotion. Exoskeleton serves multiple functions, including support, protection. It does prevent water loss, and it also provides a location for muscle attachment so that it can do so that movement is possible. In your body, bones are a location for muscle attachment, but in here, exoskeleton is. Covers all the body surface as well as invagination. It is secreted by the epidermis, specifically hypodermis. Exoskeleton can be divided up into layers. You can see them here. So we have the epicuticle, the outermost layer. Then we have procuticle, which is divided into 2 layers, and the hypodermis. The exoskeleton as a whole, it does prevent organisms, or at least provides some barrier against desiccation so that they're not drying out. And some layers are more hardened than others. There are areas for sensory reception, however, it's not completely impermeable. Modifications of the exoskeleton, you will find invaginations, such as this one here, for things like movement, areas of movement. Growth is accompanied by ecdysis. What that means is that the old exoskeleton has to be shed prior to laying, in order for new growth to occur. So here's what we see. We see a molting gel being laid down here just above the hypodermis. That molting gel is going to gradually move upward as we see new epidermis being laid down underneath it. Then as that molting gel moves up, you'll see the old epidermis being shed off, and then the new one underneath. Once that new epidermis is exposed to the air, it does need to go through a process called tanning, which it's called tanning because when it's first exposed, it's usually white, the new exoskeleton, and then it needs to harden and develop its colors. The hemicyl. The hemicyl is the area filled with, it's like a cavity for the hemolymph. And hemolymph is basically insect blood. So the hemicyl fills with hemolymph and it basically bathes the internal organs in hemolymph. That's where nutrients get exchanged, waste, sometimes gases. During metamorphosis, there's a radical change in body form as well as physiology as an immature becomes an adult. One of the principal advantages to this form of development is that there's a significant reduction in competition between adult and immature stages. So if you want to look at classic metamorphosis in, say, a caterpillar and a butterfly, where you have a caterpillar who's eating leaves, then the butterfly who's drinking nectar, there's no competition there in food source or even niche habitat or shelter. Okay, let's look at the subphylums and some of the classes within them. The chelicerates. So the chelicerates consist of ticks, mites, spiders, horseshoe crabs, the subphylum, somewhat diverse group. But what keeps them together is the fact that they have two tagmata. Those are body parts, those being labeled as the prosoma and the epistosoma. The prosoma has the eyes, the chelicerae, which are usually feeding appendages. So if you look at the spiders, those are going to be the fangs. The pedipalps and walking legs. The epistosoma, that's going to be digestion, reproductive. Those are the organs. Within that subphylum, you have the meristomates. These are extinct. These are giant water scorpions. You also have horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs are evolutionarily quite primitive. They have something called book gills. Gas exchange occurs between blood and water. So that's why they are gills. They do have external fertilization, but it occurs on land. Females bury, they dig a hole, males come up on land, and females lay the eggs, and the males deposit the sperm on top of them. So here you can actually see those book gills. The reason they're called book gills is because they look like pages of a book laid on top of each other. We're going to see a progression here of respiratory organs, starting with book gills, and then we're going to move into book lungs here shortly. Now we're in the arachnids. We have spiders, mites, ticks, and scorpions. Not quite what many of you probably thought you were going to hear classified as an arachnid. Most people just think of spiders when they think of arachnids, but it also includes mites, ticks, and scorpions. These arachnids actually evolved from the giant water scorpions, which I already mentioned were extinct. They were very early, and the exoskeleton was originally laid down as a way to conserve water. They are carnivores. Chelicerae hold prey or function as fangs. They do have a foregut, a hindgut, and a midgut, and they each serve a different function. They also have excretory glands called coxal gland. They sit, they're homologous to Nephridia, but function just a little bit differently. They also have Malpighian tubules, which you will find also in the insects, which empty via the digestive tract, and they excrete uric acid. Gas exchange is via lungs now. So they also seem as pages of a book, but they're lungs, and that means that oxygen is being exchanged via air and the lung instead of water. They also have trachea, and they open at spiracles along the abdomen. Spiracles are holes that exist little holes all along the abdomen of the organism. Circulation is open, and it pumps blood into the tissue spaces of the hemocyl. And again, the hemocyl is the cavity for hemolymph, which is the, I want to say insect blood, but it's not. It's arachnid blood in this case. There is a fusion of ganglia for neural function. Senses can be quite advanced. They do have mechanoreceptors as well as chemical receptors, and vision detects mostly changes in movement and light intensity. Remember, some of these organisms are quite adept predators. Reproduction, they are dioecious. There are males and females. There is indirect sperm transfer, so males are depositing spermatophores, little packets of sperm that are then transferred to the female. Courtship rituals are very common and can be extremely elaborate in this group, because keep in mind, we are talking about some organisms that carry venom. So, and female spiders can be larger than males. So there's a risk. Development is direct. Spiderlings look like miniature adults, so there's no metamorphosis. Scorpions, shield-like carapace. What that means is this. This is their shield-like carapace. Opisthothoma, they have a pre-abdomen, they have a post-abdomen, and they have a tail with a stinger on it. Interesting tidbit, the larger the pedipalps, the less potent the venom, less toxic the venom. The smaller the pedipalps, the more toxic the venom. Why? Because it needs to be. It doesn't need to be. What else do we have? In the scorpions, courtship is extremely common and in some cases lasts 2 to 3 days. The risk to the males here is extremely high. Some species are oviparous, some species are ovoviviparous, and some species are viviparous. These words are new to you. What this means is ova is egg layers. Let's go down here to viviparous first. Viviparous is live bearing. That means that they're having live young. Ovoviviparous means that eggs are hatching within the females. So they have eggs, but they keep them internally, and then they hatch internally, and the young crawl out. Viviparous are live bearing. So they can run the whole gamut. This is not common with most highly evolved organisms. And Araenia. These are the spiders. Chelicerae with poison glands, pedipalps, 6 to 8 eyes. As you know, most of people think it's creepy. The opisthosoma tends to be swollen or elongate, which is what gives them this shape. This is a garden spider. These are actually relatively common around here. They're actually bright green and yellow around in these parts, and they're also quite large. Okay. Oh, spinnerets also you'll find here. They make large webs as well. Here are the spinnerets. Here you're looking at eyes. And I don't know what else we're looking at. Silk. It's made of a protein. It's extremely strong. It is stored as a liquid and does not become a solid until it is spun. There are up to 7 different kinds of silk used for different purposes. So if you're going to have a safety line, or if you're going to use it to wrap up your eggs, or if you're going to use it for, even within a web, you can have different kinds of silk, because some of them may be used to capture prey and some of them are used to travel on. So actually look at this picture right here. This is the same, this is also a garden spider. These are the ones we have. So if you see here, that's a different kind of silk than you're going to find out here in this web. Silk can be resorbed and recycled if necessary. Feeding, usually insects and other arthropods. There are some very interesting spiders, but mostly insects and arthropods. In some cases, they will wrap them in silk and embalm them and just drink. It's not uncommon for spiders to liquefy their prey and eat them that way. They inject digestive enzymes. 2 spiders are venomous to humans. Those would be the black widow, which is the one you hear about the most probably. It has a neurotoxic venom, which is toxic. And the other would be the brown recluse, which has a histolic venom. This causes tissue death surrounding the bite. For the most part, black widow maybe a little more so, but for the most part, unless you are immunocompromised, they're not, for a full-grown healthy adult, not a huge risk. We don't have an occasional accidental traveled in brown recluse, but not really brown recluse. We definitely don't have black widows. There were reports of some traveling in on produce, but not common. Reproduction, complex behaviors, because again, males are risking their lives. Females are larger, and they better make sure that they're not mistaken as dinner instead of a potential mate. Really handy when they can just deposit the sperm and then leave, but they frequently have to prove themselves as a worthy mate. Opilionids, daddy longlegs, or harvestmen. These are not spiders. Frequently mistaken as such. Very, very frequently. This is because the prosoma broadly joins the opisthosoma. They are omnivores. They do both external and internal digestion. They are very toxic. They carry something called quinones, but they cannot bite people. Their jaws are much too small. They're highly common. Acarina mites. Usually, most mites are not visible to the human eye, a millimeter or less. They are free living. They're frequently they're ectoparasites. Chiggers are probably the most well known. If you spend any time outside, they'll make you itch like crazy. Feather mites are common within nests. Nasty little things. Ticks. Ectoparasites in all life stages. The most well-known historic tick is the black-legged tick, what most people call the deer tick. They have a 2-year life cycle. The adult is the size of a sesame seed. The nymph, which is the most common to transmit Lyme disease, which is why it's well known, is the size of a poppy seed. They are not the only tick to transmit Lyme disease. Lone Star ticks do as well, but they're not common to New York State. There they are, Ixodes scapularis. That's them. Crustaceans. All those things that you like to eat for the most part. Almost all of them are aquatic. The exceptions would be terrestrial isopods, what some people would call pill bugs or potato bugs or roly-polies. They have 2 pairs of antennae. They are biramous appendages, which means that they have 2 branches. So if you are looking at the antenna, you see 2 branches here on the tip. That is unique. The Malacostraca includes the order Decapoda. That's the largest order. Shrimp, crayfish, lobsters, and crabs. Their external structure includes the cephalothorax, which would be the fusion of the head and thorax, then the abdomen. Their digestive system has a foregut, a midgut, and a hindgut. Respiratory system has gills, very extensive gills actually, which you cannot see in this diagram. Well, you can here. It takes up a large portion of their body cavity. But their circulation is open with a dorsal heart and major arteries. Blood enters the hemocell and then it returns to the heart. They do have a nervous system with ganglia that control the head and appendages, and a significant number of sensory structures, including the antenna and their eyes, the statocysts, which are again for balance, chemoreceptors, proprioceptors, and tactile ceti. Endocrine system is much more complicated than we've seen to this point. They do have ecdysis, and their endocrine system varies slightly depending on gender. So they have something called an X organ. You will find the X organ in the eye stalks. So if you notice when you look here, actually this line cuts across this, their eyes are actually on little stalks. These X organs produce molt inhibiting hormones, and they target the Y organs. The Y organs are at the base of the maxillae, which is part of the mouth, And those release ecdysone, which is a molt inhibiting hormone. When that hormone's not present, then ecdysis occurs. So these two organs together are doing a lot to control when molting happens. In males, there are androgenic glands that promote development of testes and male characteristics. They have something special called the green glands in crayfish for excretion. In other Malacostracans, there are maxillary glands. There are males and females. They male after the female molts and fertilize the eggs, which then attach underneath the female to her pleopods. Others have planktonic larvae. Cannot see her pleopods. So she carries them around underneath her for protection. This is just an example of a larva of a barnacle, which are unique to the group. The terrestrial isopods, or the pill bugs. These are must remain moist because they do still have gills, and therefore respiration happens between water and gills. Amphipods. You may have seen these on the beach. They tend to be in the sand, kind of crawling around. Brachiopods, these are fairy shrimp. Sometimes they're called water fleas. And these particular, in the freshwater species, parthenogenesis is common, which means they can self-fertilize and reproduce. They tend to be kind of flattened, so they can live in small crevices. Copepods are the most abundant crustacean. They are commonly found in many, many, many freshwater and even marine food webs. These are like you go out in elementary school and take up a bucket of pond water, you're going to find a copepod. And barnacles, finally, are marine. They're monoecious. They have the larvae that I showed you up with discussion of the class. Those larvae settle and metamorphosize into the adult. The adult barnacles look occasionally something like this. In some cases, these are labeled as parasites.